Hey there guys, my name is Jack Beckwith, and I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania, originally from Menlo Park, California. This is my week 4 peer assignment for the Introduction to Music Production course on Coursera, and I thought I would take you through some of the basic functionality of a plug-in compressor, as you see on the screen, using my DAW, which happens to be Logic Pro X. So I'll be covering the threshold, ratio, attack, and release parameters, and how to apply changes to each of them in this particular plugin. Let me start with threshold. So the threshold is simply the level at which the compressor starts to function. When the input is below the threshold, the sound is not adjusted at all. It remains linear. However, when the input exceeds the threshold, the compressor snaps into action. So right now I have the threshold set at 0 decibels, which happens to be the maximum level in a DAW, but I can adjust it by dragging up and down. And I'll set it at something like -20 decibels. As you'll notice, nothing has happened yet in this particular diagram, and that's because our ratio is still set at 1:1, meaning input is equal to output. The compressor is not yet doing its job. However, if I adjust the ratio by dragging right to left, you'll notice immediately that the diagram starts to change. Let's set the ratio at something like 3.5 to 1. 3.5 decibels of input is equal to 1 decibel of output whenever the threshold is exceeded. The ratio is simply the amount of compression once the signal crosses the threshold. So you'll notice that things have changed in this particular diagram. We have input on the x-axis and output on the y-axis. Now, anything below -20, anything below our threshold, remains linear. Input is still equal to output in this range. Once we exceed the threshold, once we go above -20 decibels, you'll notice that the line flattens out. In other words, the compressor starts to work and applies the ratio of 3.5 to 1. So that's a little bit about the threshold and the ratio. It's all up to the producer to adjust those two parameters according to the track that they're working with, whether it be some sort of vocal or instrument. It's up to the producer to adjust them, but hopefully that gives you some insight into using them. Now let's move to attack and release. Now, attack and release control how fast the fader reacts to the compressor. Specifically, attack adjusts how fast the fader comes down after exceeding the threshold. So right now I have the attack set to a bare minimum of 0 milliseconds. If the attack is set to something very low, transients will disappear entirely. However, you'll often run the risk of distortion, picking up extra partials that you don't want, and that'll obscure the sound and make it less musical. So be very careful of that. Oftentimes you want to raise the attack just a little bit, but say, we go up to something like 86 milliseconds. If you set the attack a little higher, distortion, especially with instruments, often becomes more muted or will disappear entirely, but the transients on entrances will become a little bit more noticeable. If you set the attack too high, 200 milliseconds is the maximum for the attack in this particular plugin, but oftentimes you can set it even higher. You might notice a little bit of swell into each successive clip, so be wary of that and adjust accordingly. Now looking at the release is how fast the fader returns to normal after crossing back below the threshold. If the release is very low, as we have here at 5 milliseconds, you might notice some distortion. You might pick up some extra partials that you don't want, especially with instruments. So sometimes it's good to set it a little bit higher. 160 milliseconds is probably higher than I would ever go, but adjust accordingly. If you set it too high, 5,000 milliseconds is well too high in pretty much all cases, but that's the maximum we have here, you'll notice some swell. So attack and release, again, are up to fine-tuning of the producer. So once you have everything configured, the threshold, the ratio, the attack and release, you can move over here to the gain. The gain adjusts the volume of the track in its entirety. So I can use this fader to adjust up and down. That's something to do after everything, the threshold, the ratio, the attack, and release are configured to the desires of the producer. So hopefully I've given you a little insight into this particular compressor, and I'm really excited for the rest of the course. Give me some feedback. Thanks so much, guys.